For the first time on One Lap Billy, we're going to test a tire. And that's the Yokohama A052 on MotoIQ's Project NSX to see if we can turn a faster lap than that car has ever done before.
Billy Johnson's got it done.
Billy Johnson on Pierre Kleinu and Billy Johnson.
My goodness.
Billy Johnson realizes it is go time.
120 mile an hour slide.
Now that 156 flat was nearly 3 seconds faster than the car's previous best lap time, mostly thanks to those super sticky Yokohama A052 tires, which were actually a little bit narrower than the previous Nitto and T05s that were on the car before. The Nittos came in a 235 front and a 275 width rear tire, while the Yokohama A052 doesn't come in those sizes and were only available in a slightly narrower 215 front and 265 width rear tire. What makes that lap time even more impressive is due to the fact the car was down probably over 15 wheel horsepower and was likely making around 255 to 260 wheel horsepower at that time. This was because the stock restrictive muffler was put back onto the car and the gutted imported intake manifold was removed and a stock intake manifold was put back on, but the vacuum lines were not reconnected to the butterflies that open and change the intake manifold's volume to improve the power band across the RPM range and thus actually restricts the engine even further at higher RPM. So it's likely the car is making even less horsepower than 255 at the tire. MotoIQ's Project NSX has undergone a lot of changes over the years. I'll post a link to their website in the description down below with a link to those articles. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the car has recently undergone a lot of changes, most notably the 2002 front-end conversion that replaces the heavy pop-up headlights with the lighter and more aerodynamic fixed headlights. It also has a vented carbon fiber NSXR style hood that increases front downforce, and wider front and rear fenders from downforce that increases the width about 6 millimeters, which will enable us to run wider tires in the future. It also has KW Variant 3 coilovers, and we're trying new rates from Swift springs to match those found on the NSXR. As you lower an NSX, the suspension geometry changes with the front roll centers dropping a lot and the rear camber gain increasing and getting a lot worse, so the car actually starts to oversteer the more you lower it. So the stiffer front spring rates of the NSXR should help combat and improve the handling of our car. Other than that, the car's pretty much stock with no other suspension or engine changes. And the car has a full interior with a bumping sound system and a 10-inch subwoofer. Let's check out the lap. Alright, first lap ever on the Yokohama A052 tire, driving MotoIQ's Project NSX. Up to third gear on the front straightaway, crossing start finish now. Approaching turn 1, braking at the curb on the right, down to third gear, a little bit of entry neutrality, and then back to full throttle, a little bit of exit oversteer, coming up and braking for button hook, down to second, keeping it tight, nice and tidy, full throttle, driving it off the corner, putting down all that 255 horsepower. Third, entering cotton corners, braking at the curb on the left. Apex the curb on the right, keeping it nice and clean, not dropping my tire on the left there, full throttle over the crest, little bit of exit oversteer, not much, tighten the line back up, then up over the hump, up to fourth gear into the fast right left before bus stop. Nice and clean, braking for bus stop down to third, using all the curb but not dropping my tires on either side like all the wankers out there. Up to fourth gear, entering really fast Riverside, never going below 100 miles an hour. There's a lot of grip from these Yokohama A052 tires. Through the kink, then braking for Phil Hill down to third, a little bit of entry neutrality, a little bit of exit oversteer. Those stiffer front Swift springs that match the NSXR spring rate are better but not quite enough. Braking, oh, that was a terrible heel-toe downshift. The clutch is super grabby and kicked the back end sideways. And then tightening the line, there's a truck off on the side. A little bit of rotation through the center there. Still use a little bit more front roll resistance. So full throttle through the S's, coming up to Sunset. Braking down to third. Nice entry neutrality, nice exit, great balance through there, and then finishing out the lap at a 156 flat. That 156 flat was my first time ever driving on that Yokohama A052 tire and the first time that I've driven the NSX in nearly 7 years. And it could be the fastest naturally aspirated street tire stock aero lap time ever around Buttonwillow for an NSX or an S2000. If it's not, write in the comments down below and send a link of who went faster with stock aero, naturally aspirated, and a 200 treadwear street tire. But now the all-important question, does it drift? Bit. I'm actually pretty disappointed in the way I drifted that. Mostly because those Yokohamas just have so much grip that 255 wheel horsepower is not enough to overcome that and sustain a nice lurid power slide when those tires are in their prime. But if I overheated the tires and beat them up, sure, I could have done a much longer, nicer drift, and I have in the past in that car, but I'm actually trying to save the condition of those A052s to do a comparison of the current 17-inch front, 18-inch rear wheels with an 18-inch front, 19-inch rear wheel combination in the NSX at a future date. So if we're trying to be conservative and half-assing the drift, I'm just going to leave that as a maybe or a little bit. Overall, I'm really impressed with the Yokohama A052 tire. Its outright dry grip is insane for a 200 treadwear rating street tire that's faster than most R compound and many other tires with ratings well below 200. Now I'll post a link to an article that I wrote in the description down below that explains why treadwear ratings are pretty much useless and are nothing more than marketing and sales tools for tire manufacturers. But that's also been the reason that caused this 200 treadwear rating tire war that has necessitated Yokohama to put so much time and energy as well as motorsport technology into their compounding and construction to create the A052. And there's a reason why, if you look at the top of the timesheets, whether it's a time attack, track event, club race, One Lap of America, or Optima Ultimate Street Car Challenge, that the A052 is, if it's not at the top, it populates a lot of the top of the categories for street class tires because it's that good. And it's not just that good on the track, but it's really good on the street too. I was impressed and blown away with how quiet it was on the street, with no droning and constant tire noise and harshness of NVH transmitted into the car that many track-focused tires tend to do. So the A052 is actually pretty darn streetable and just overall is an excellent tire. The stiffer spring rates from Swift Springs to match those of the NSXR definitely help to improve the balance of our NSX. Reducing rear camber to around 1.8 or 1.9 degrees definitely also helped to reduce the car's oversteering tendencies. As I mentioned earlier, the more you lower an NSX, the more, from a geometry standpoint, it tends to oversteer. So these changes helped, but we still need to make progress in that same direction to improve the balance of our car. Well, that wraps up my one lap testing the Yokohama A052 tire on MotoIQ's Project NSX. If you like what you saw, don't forget to hit subscribe and hit that like button. If you didn't like it, you stuck around this long so far, so just hit that like button anyway. Now, just for kicks, let's compare the data of the NSX in white to a McLaren 720S in red. On the front straightaway, the NSX tops out at 113 miles an hour, while the 720S blows its doors off with a top speed of over 144 miles an hour. Through turn 1, the apex speed of the NSX was actually a little bit higher with those super sticky A052s, was able to squeak out about 2 miles an hour faster minimum speed over the 720S, which was running on Goodyear 3R tires, which are really sticky. Accelerating up to turn 2, the 720 tops out at 106 miles an hour, while the NSX only made it up to 91 miles an hour. Through the hairpin, the NSX had a little bit lower mid-corner speed, but had a really good exit until about 50 miles an hour, where the 720 just, again, took off up to its 123 miles an hour top speed at turn 3, while the NSX only got up to 100 miles an hour. Through cotton corners, the speeds were fairly even, with the 720 launching out of the apex to the next turn. Entering the fast right-left before bus stop, the 720 got up to a little over 103 miles an hour while the NSX was at 92 miles an hour. And then braking for the bus stop, the 720 actually had a 3 mile an hour higher mid-corner speed, most likely due to the increased downforce. Then the 720 just took off on its way up to the entry of Riverside, getting up to 115 miles an hour, where the NSX only got up to 98. But the NSX still kept accelerating through Riverside and had a similar mid-corner speed of 100 miles an hour, actually beating the 720 by a couple tenths of a mile an hour. But then exiting Riverside, once again, the 720 just leaves the NSX in the dust. For Phil Hill, the NSX actually had a little bit slower entry speed, and looks like there may have been a data dropout there because it looks a little funky. But then on the way to the sweeper, the 720 got up to 132 miles an hour while the NSX only got up to 108, and both of them broke at a pretty similar rate. You see the big drop off on entry speed from the poor clutch release or the poor heel-toe downshifting that I did in the NSX, which overslowed the entry and just kind of hurt the overall corner. Exiting the sweeper through the S's flat out, the NSX is accelerating at a pretty linear rate up to its 118 mile an hour top speed, while the 720 gets up to 124.8 miles an hour before having to breathe the throttle for the last left in the S's, where it then accelerates on up to 140 miles an hour before braking for sunset. Both cars decelerate at a very similar rate, and once again the NSX just beats it a little bit in terms of mid-corner speed with a 2 to 3 mile an hour higher minimum speed. Once again, the lightweight NSX with a good balance and sticky tires was able to out-corner the 720, but in speeds around 80 miles an hour, the 720's aero starts to take over. But exiting Sunset onto the front straightaway, again, there's just no contest. The 720 just completely annihilates the 255 wheel horsepower NSX. And that's what an additional 450 horsepower gets you with the 720. And bonus, if you cannot stand listening to voiceovers, watching in-car video, like me, I can't stand it, you get to see the video of this lap with no commentary, so check it out.